Sports Talk Chicago. Here Jon Zaghloul, and we are back and ready for today's special guest. He's the Bears beat reporter for the Chicago Tribune and a contributor to ESPN 1000. Please welcome Dan Wiederer to the program. Dan, it's great to have you on. How are you?
I'm doing good, John. We got to the end of the biggest searches. The Bears are obviously still filling out their front office and their coaching staffs, but the two big ones are done, so doing much better now.
What was your reaction to both those hirings?
Look, I mean, you have a first-time general manager pairing with a first-time coach, and it's a leap of faith, right? And you're also turning over the offense to Luke Getsy, a first-time coordinator who is a first-time play caller, right? So there's going to be a lot that the Bears are going to have to learn through a trial and error phase in the early stages. And so I think a lot of this in a world that's set up for sort of instant verdicts is a wait and see, let's see kind of scenario for the Bears. And we're going to just have to see how the leadership of Ryan Poles as the general manager and Matt Eberflus as the head coach takes root, and just how quickly they can sort of get a plan together. And really, John, I think a lot of this is about having a realistic plan, right? And I think some of the benefit of bringing in these two guys fresh together at the same time is they can take clean eyes to all of the things that are going on with the roster, the depth chart, the things at Halas Hall, and start to view it with an objectivity that is needed at this point.
Were they your preferences based on the candidates we knew about?
You know, I personally, I probably would have leaned toward, now I've said a lot through the early stages of the search process that I'm fine hiring a defensive minded head coach or a special teams minded head coach or somebody, if you believe in their leadership ability and their ability to take over the entirety of the football team and lead it with a style that resonates and brings out the best in both sides of the ball. Given where Justin is at in his stage of development, I would have preferred to spend a little more time digging deeper with some of the offensive-minded candidates, whether that meant hiring them or not. The finalist list of Jim Caldwell, Dan Quinn, and Matt Eberflus didn't have a lot of 2022 offensive-minded background to it, right? And so there's a little bit of that at the end of the search where you say, boy, I'm going to scratch my head on that until we see the results. Obviously, the New York Giants hire Brian Daboll up in New York. That's the guy that the Bears talked to in their initial wave of head coaching interviews, and we're going to have to see what he does with Daniel Jones, right? I think there was a lot of people in Chicago that said, man, wouldn't it be cool to take a guy like Daboll and pair him with a guy like Justin Fields, given the rise that we've seen with Josh Allen and the Buffalo Bills over the last 4 years, and see where that would have gone. That obviously didn't happen, and so we'll see where they go from here.
Why do you think they didn't hire Daboll? I mean, he was a favorite for throughout the season, too. I mean, we've heard his name a lot throughout the year. Why do you think at the end of the day he wasn't hired?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are multiple layers to that question that we're going to have to dig on a little bit in the months to come. We're going to have to get a little bit better feel for where Ryan Poles' head was at as he went into this coaching search, really basically got to the end of his coaching search less than 48 hours after he was hired as the general manager. So he obviously had a very strong feeling within him about who Matt Eberflus was. He said on Monday that as soon as they got in the room together, he felt the connection, and that really resonated with him. But it is worth asking, why not Brian Daboll, given all the things that we've talked about? Now, maybe Brian Daboll was going to follow Joe Schoen to New York all along, and that was a familiarity that felt good to the both of them. But still, the Bears, again, had him in for an initial interview over Zoom in the first phase and didn't bring him back for an in-person interview. In fact, they didn't bring back Nathaniel Hackett either, who ended up being the head coach in Denver with an offensive background. And so you do have to ask yourself, with some of these offensive-minded coaches, listen, we're going to have a lot of new head coaches in the league in 2022. And for years to come, it is more than fair to compare all of them side by side, right? Along with Matt Eberflus, to say these guys were on the menu at the time you hired a new coach. This is the guy you went to, but how does it compare against all these other guys that were available?
Is the Jim Harbaugh situation concerning?
Well, listen, if Jim Harbaugh winds up in the NFC North, and if Jim Harbaugh winds up coaching the Minnesota Vikings and potentially bringing Vic Fangio as his defensive coordinator, that's great theater, right? And it's great, just a subplot to all of this that leads you to ask the questions on, okay, what was the roadblock there for either side? Maybe Jim Harbaugh had a roadblock. Maybe the Bears had a roadblock. Who knows what that was? But if he winds up in the division that you're in, and obviously we know what his track record was in San Francisco, it certainly is concerning, right, that you're going to have to compete against that at a time where the division seems like it's opening wide. And so we're just going to have to keep that on the radar for a couple of years as well.
Dan Wiederer here on Sports Talk Chicago. Dan, are you convinced that the Bears are going to take the North and never give it back?
Am I convinced? No, because I've been through 9 seasons here, John, and they've given it back many, many times, right? And they just have not seen sustained success. I think we've talked before on this program. They haven't had 3 consecutive winning seasons since 1988. That is a long way back now. And so this is a very steep climb and a heavy lift for Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus. I like their ambition. I like their vision. I like what they're trying to sell here. I just need to see it to believe it, because I've been through too much following this organization, covering this organization, to know that's not necessarily been in their DNA for the last 30 years.
Was that too bold a claim? Like, should Poles have even said that? I mean, people are going to hold him to that now. They're going to think about that later.
No, I think it's just one of those pep rally moments that naturally springs up in these introductory news conferences. I think for a segment of the fan base, it was a yeah moment. You feel like, let's go play this Sunday. Let's put this to the test right away. I think, to your point, if the Bears are stuck in this 7-10, 8-9 world 2 or 3 years from now, it's going to become a point that gets mocked a lot. What about taking the North and never giving it back, Ryan? It just hasn't happened. And so he'll have to live with that. But I think that's just one of those things that comes up in these introductory news conferences that is meant to kind of stir up the fans. And I think for a segment, it was one of those moments that's like, yeah, let's go do this. I like where your head's at.
You were at the press conference on Monday. What did you make of the whole thing?
It's unfortunate that I've been through so many of these, right? And that George McCaskey and his time as chairman has been through so many of these. You go back to Phil Emery, and then Mark Trestman, and then Ryan Pace, and then John Fox, and then Matt Nagy. And here we are again with these two guys, Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles, at the dais. And you say, man, there's just a routine to this that is too familiar. I just finished my 9th season covering the team, as I mentioned. I just met my 4th head coach. That's too many head coaches to be involved with in that amount of time, right? Since 2013 September, when I jumped on the beat. And so you say, boy, they really got to figure out a way to put off the next one of these introductory news conferences for a long time. There's just been too many of them. Because of that, I think there was a feeling in the room where it was, I maybe would use the word fatigue, but whatever it was, it just, the enthusiasm and the energy didn't seem to be where it was when we've gone through some of these other introductory news conferences that I've mentioned, because we've just done it so many times. And I think the city of Chicago shares the feeling that, all right, let's just see the results before we get too excited and too enthusiastic about these new hires, because there's a lot to prove for an organization that hasn't proven a lot for a long time.
How to compare to Matt Nagy and Ryan Pace when they were introduced, when they were hired? How'd this one compare to that?
Yeah, it was different because I think at that time, Ryan Pace had been on the job for 3 years, right? And Ryan Pace had learned and brought himself to a stage where he was ready to pounce. Ryan Pace, the previous year, had drafted a quarterback number 2 overall. And there was a feeling like, okay, now we've just got to get Mitch paired with the right guy. And so there was, in that moment, this excitement that drummed up. To no fault of Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus, they unfortunately inherit the dynamic of people going, well, it didn't work 4 years ago when we brought in the new coach to take Mitch to the next level. So there's going to be some natural skepticism and cynicism from the outside about what you can get done here. Listen, they've got to put together a plan for Justin Fields going forward. And so I think that's going to really fall heavily on the shoulders of Matt Eberflus. And then obviously by extension, Luke Getsy, his offensive overseer, who's going to have to bring Justin to levels that Justin wants to get to. I did think it was notable that we heard from Justin Fields on Monday, right? That he sat at that dais after Ryan Poles and Matt Eberflus and George McCaskey answered questions and talked about being excited for a clean slate and a fresh start and trying to reboot himself after what was obviously a very frustrating rookie season in 5 or 6 different ways.
What is the plan for Justin Fields? What should they be doing or prioritizing in his second year?
Well, listen, you're bringing in a coordinator who comes from that Kyle Shanahan tree. And so you know what that offense looks like. You know what the Sean McVay, Kyle Shanahan offense can look like and what that can do for a quarterback like Justin, who has the traits, right, to be able to get out on the edge, to use play action, to use some of the boot game and bring himself to the next level. I think you heard from Ryan Poles on Monday that they want to, first and foremost, identify Justin's biggest strengths and accentuate those. Then they'll identify the weaknesses and put together a plan to address those and make those become improved areas in Justin's game. But it starts with figuring out what he does best and making sure you pair that with what Luke Getsy wants to do offensively and make sure that all of that at all times is built around what Justin does best and what can take this offense to the highest levels. Let's see where we go. Hopefully we'll get to hear from Luke Getsy, before the summer and get a better feel for what his vision is and what his scouting report on Justin is, because I think that's important to know how he sees the quarterback before we start talking about the offense that he's going to put together for the quarterback.
How do you evaluate Fields? I mean, I don't think many people expected 7 touchdowns, 10 picks in his rookie year.
Yeah, and obviously a passer rating around 73. They had the fumbling issues. It was a very uneven rookie season. I think probably the most frustrating thing is you had that Monday night moment in Pittsburgh, right? And Justin Fields leads that fourth quarter rally. And everyone in the building felt like that was the arrival, that was the moment that Justin was going to hit the springboard in his rookie season and head forth. Well, then they had the bye week. And then he came back from the bye week and he injured his ribs against the Ravens. And then he came back from the injured ribs and he injured his ankles. And then when he had the very last opportunity in week 18 to play one more game against the Minnesota Vikings, he tests positive for COVID and is ruled out for that game. And so it was an interrupted final 2 months of Justin Fields' rookie season that left us with what you said, 7 touchdown passes, I think 15 turnovers. And it just wasn't good enough to make you feel like, yes, we can rubber stamp this as 100%, no doubt, franchise quarterback for the Chicago Bears for the next 5 to 8 years. So now Justin's got a lot to answer in year 2. I think he's eager to answer those questions. I think he's eager to get to work, but there are a lot of question marks that will follow him in to the 2022 regular season.
What do you think's a realistic expectation for this year? Like, what should he be aiming for?
I think we need to feel like on Sundays when we're watching Chicago Bears football that the offense looks like the rest of the league looks, right? We can't think of scoring 24 points as some monumental achievement, right? It's not. Like, teams in this league score north of 24 all the time. And so it has to look like it's an NFL offense in 2022. And so the eye test is going to be very important to see if Justin is understanding what he's seeing from opposing defenses, if he's recognizing how to use his strengths within the offense, if he's able to make plays that are on script and continue to make plays off script, which he has the ability to do. And so I think it's all just about seeing the progress with our eyes and feeling like, boy, you've got a quarterback that looks more comfortable and who is bringing the guys around him to a higher level, right? I think if you go back and look at 2021, you say, boy, there's too many guys that didn't reach the potential that we know they have. Starts with Allen Robinson, fall off. He may not be back going forward. Cole Kmet, he's got to go to the next level. Darnell Mooney obviously took another good step in his second season, but these core playmakers on offense have to look like they're playing better along with Justin because of Justin, right? And that's got to be something that we measure as well.
I find the Robinson situation really interesting. Do you blame Robinson? Do you blame Justin Fields, this offense, Matt Nagy? Who's to blame for what happened this year?
Yeah, shared responsibility. I don't think that the offense put him in the greatest positions to succeed. He obviously had interruptions himself with some injuries and COVID and all those things that came along with a rocky 2021 season. I think what's sad is the Bears had one of their better free agent hits with Allen Robinson, who joined the team in 2018 and showed that he was a guy who could catch 100 balls for you, who could get 1,200 yards in a season, could be that number one receiver in your offense. And now it looks like they're going to go their separate ways. Who knows how Ryan Poles views this? I think if you listen to anything on Monday, there was an emphasis on speed and explosion. Those aren't necessarily the adjectives that you attach to Allen Robinson's game. He's a guy that has done a lot in this league for multiple quarterbacks and multiple teams with his skill set. But if you're hell-bent on bringing in more explosion and more speed and sort of rebooting this thing at a time where it needs to be rebooted, I'm not sure Allen Robinson fits in your plans. And so, again, kind of a sad way to close the book on what was a promising tenure in Chicago up until September of 2021.
Who do you think fits those plans?
Fits the speed and explosion plans? Look, I mean, you're talking about Darnell Mooney being really the only core piece in the receiving core that is under contract to be back in 2022. So I think the answer to that question is going to come in free agency. I think it's going to come in the draft. And I think Ryan Poles is going to have to feel like he has a good understanding for what the long-term plan needs to be. I think you heard some realism from Eberflus and Poles on Monday and saying, like Eberflus said, this is 2022 is about pouring the concrete, right? And getting the foundation established. And so it wasn't this brash promise of we're going to compete. We're going to, this year we're going to be in a contender for the most meaningful things that are in the NFL. And so now with that, you may not be able to address all the things you want to address in the acquisition cycle of 2022 because you understand that you're trying to build a sustainable winner. And so some of these holes may not be filled until 2023, right? When you've had a more draft capital, when you've got your salary cap back in the spot where it needs to be. And now you can go and make some calculated decisions instead of just some really need-based decisions just to fill out a depth chart so you can practice in training camp.
What is an expectation for the Bears this year? A lot of people have said they should be a fringe playoff team. They have the roster, but where do you gauge where they should be?
This is my issue with trying to overstate how close they are. The goal should not be to contend for the number 7 seed and the wild card in the NFC, right? We saw how that went in 2020, and that's got to be a cautionary tale for everyone in that building at Hallis Hall. That season was as frustrating of a season as a lot of people have experienced around here. So don't prop that up. Don't hang the banner for the playoff berth in 2020. No one enjoyed that season. Not the players, not the coaches, not the fans, not anyone in the front office. So don't think that that's the bar you're trying to clear. The bar you're trying to clear is what we've talked about. It's building yourself into what the Kansas City Chiefs have been during Ryan Poles' time in Kansas City. And it's a team that makes the playoffs every single year. It's a team that for the last 4 years has been playing on Conference Championship Sunday every single year, has gone to 2 Super Bowls and won 1. So raise the bar. And in order to raise the bar, you have to not sort of tempt yourself to take shortcuts. And Ryan Poles talked about that on Monday. Like, we can't think that we're so close and then you try to take a shortcut and you get this one flash season and then it's followed by 3 years of mediocrity. The goal is to set yourself up to sustain it year after year after year. And so I'm not necessarily setting expectations for the 2022 Bears to win 9 or 10 games and sneak in the back door of the playoffs. It's if you're 7-10 and you're 8-9, but you're establishing core pieces and Justin's going to the next level and the young playmakers you have are going to the next level, that's fine. Because then that positions you for 2023 to maybe start that run of sustained success, right? And let's just keep using those words over and over, sustained success, because that's been the goal that the Bears have not been able to get to. They're constantly running through the minefield, the mines blow up, and they're back at the starting line, as they are here now again, with a new general manager, a new coach, a new front office, a new coaching staff.
That's how you're going to evaluate them, right? When you look back at Poles and Eberflus in a couple of years, it's going to be sustained success that's going to determine how good they did.
No question. Matt Nagy was the NFL Coach of the Year 3 years ago. He's at the Super Bowl, right? In February of 2019, he's accepting the Coach of the Year honors after winning 12 games and taking the Bears to a division championship. And we all thought at that time, boy, this looks like a promising window that's opening for the Bears to be in this hunt, contending for a Super Bowl, for the next several years in a row. It didn't happen, right? They fell off, lost more than they won over the last 3 years, had to reboot the whole thing. And so, yes, sustained success, it has to be the measure for these guys. And that's okay if it starts out, and it's not 12-4 and it's 7-10 instead. But you see that you're putting things together that can be sustained, and we'll see where they take that.
You mentioned Matt Nagy. Wanted to ask you about a couple of reports that came out about Mitch Trubisky blowing him off at the end of the 2020 season, and now Allen Robinson come out and said the same thing. What's your reaction to those two reports?
Yeah, I think this is just kind of the byproduct of losing, right? And things go south, and they go south in ways that the team can keep under wraps while it's happening, and then it goes south in ways that when a new start begins, people start talking and sharing their experiences and their frustrations about why it went south. And so I think it's all illuminating that this did not sort of build the momentum that 2018 should have provided, and that when the offense started to struggle, the disconnect sort of came in a little bit. And so it's something that all coaches and all general managers have to figure out a way to deal with. I give the Bears credit for limiting the melodrama and this dysfunction to the level they did, but that's not the end goal, right? The goal is to win football games and do so in a way that gives everyone the belief that you're the leader that's going to take this thing to the next level. And so that's now Matt Eberflus's challenge, to avoid some of those potholes that Matt Nagy couldn't.
Would you say Matt Eberflus is going to be a good leader of men?
The scouting reports you hear from people who have coached with him and people who have played for him are positive, right? That he has a way of connecting, that he has a way of setting a standard that also is accompanied by accountability, right? It's one thing to set a standard, and then it's another thing to make sure that your guys are meeting that standard. And if they're not, they're punished for it, or they're called out for it, or other guys who are meeting the standard are propped up and said, these are the models of what we're trying to do here. Matt Eberflus has all those qualities. Over time, we're going to have to see how he does in this head coaching chair. He told us Monday, look, he's going to hand off play calling duties of defense to his coordinator. That gives him more opportunity to move around, to be present in offensive meetings, to be able to be a resource for his offensive players and coaches. We'll see where he goes with that. I think you certainly like some of the things you've heard from Matt Eberflus and about Matt Eberflus. And now, again, going back to the start of what we talked about, first-timers have to learn how to do this on a new stage. And as you know, Chicago's a different stage than Indianapolis, than Kansas City. And so you better be prepared for what comes with that, more intense spotlight as well.
Yeah, Dan, you're going to hold him accountable. Dan Wiederer here on Sports Talk Chicago. Dan, a few more questions before we finish up. First off, Jeff Dickerson, how did you react to his passing?
Yeah, very sad moment for me, John. And Jeff is a guy that I went to college with back at the University of Illinois in the late 90s. And so we've known each other for more than 2 decades, right? Obviously became a lot closer when we got on the Bears beat when I came back to Chicago in 2013. And Jeff's positivity, his perspective, his ability to balance a very demanding job with some of the things he went through in his personal life, obviously losing his wife to cancer a few years before he himself fought his own battle with cancer, and handling all that with the grace, the positivity, the energy, the loyalty to his friends. It's something that you heard all throughout the days after he passed that was so ever present with everyone who had a relationship with Jeff. You felt his energy and his positivity and his loyalty and his ability to pick you up, even at times when probably he was the one that needed to be picked up more with everything he was dealing with. And so tremendously sad. I was very pleased that we were able to name the Good Guy Award that the Pro Football Writers Association Chicago chapter gives out to players in the Chicago Bears organization that best sort of exemplify the camaraderie and the spirit between, team and media. And to rename that the Jeff Dickerson Good Guy Award was cool, because there's no better guy than Jeff Dickerson. And so to have his name attached to that's going to be fun going forward.
What will you remember best about him?
The positivity. I mean, John, this is a guy who lost his wife to cancer, and then with a young son is battling his own fight with colon cancer, which spread to his liver and then ultimately took his life. And yet no one who was around him in 2021 ever felt those down days from Jeff. He was always full of optimism and energy and belief that he had the strength and conviction to fight it. And it's a lesson for all of us as we go about our daily lives and try to keep our own issues in perspective, that there's just something uplifting about someone who can attack the most serious and just deep issues that you can find in life and do it with such positivity and grace. I remind myself of it every morning that, listen, like, you got to dig deep and you got to find that positive energy within you and do what JD would have done.
And Dan, before we finish up today, last question, what's the most memorable moment you shared with JD?
So I'm going to give you two because they kind of contrast one another. We had dinner, Jeff, myself, and Rich Campbell at the Versace Mansion in Miami before the Bears played the Dolphins in 2018. It was just a really kind of lavish dinner, drank a lot of wine together, had a really good night, and just really soaked in the camaraderie of that. Jeff was also a big fan of going to the Hibachi Grill at the mall in Bourbonnais during training camp. So you cannot have two bigger contrasts than the Versace Mansion and the Hibachi Grill at the mall in Bourbonnais. And to be able to have the same amount of fun in those two venues tells you a lot about the company you're sharing, right? And so I always bring that up because it tells you kind of that it's about the people you're with and the spirit of the people you're with more than the environment you're in, because you can have fun anywhere you go. And that's certainly one that I like to share.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for joining me. Always a pleasure to have you on. Best wishes covering this new regime. Hopefully it gets a bit better, but always appreciate your time.
We're inside of 4 weeks before the combine starts, John. So there's not much time to catch our breath. We're going to be right back at it before we know it.